Okay, Paul Knouff, MD. I am back with another video. Today I am talking about something that's pretty boring and hard to explain. It's responsibility.
Boring.
Yeah, it could be pretty boring. So, what is responsibility? I would define responsibility as those actions that support order in a chaotic world and appropriate ownership of processes and just all the aspects of our world. I'm sure that you can think of things that if we don't take ownership of them, that they can get out of hand, again, become chaotic, whether it's our finances or our children or our government or whatever it is. Responsibility is a really good thing, and it's a really good thing in medicine, and one of the main reasons that I chose family medicine as opposed to other styles of medicine, because I did feel this strong sense of responsibility. And when it comes down to it, there's nothing really that separates a primary care provider from their patients in terms of things that we don't touch on, that we don't have responsibility for. The division of the responsibility, or the appropriate ownership of various aspects of medicine, let's say, is a super important topic, and I think related to what I'm looking for in my practice. In terms of medical practice, how responsibility is shared amongst all the members that provide medical care is super important to our everyday activities, and historically has largely been based on a chain of command, like a military style arrangement, with the doctor being sort of at the top, leading the team, as we might say today, and then all of the affiliated members of the team, all the way to the janitor, to the people that maintain the building. They're all important in the care of people in our medical system. The medical system needs some kind of structure that promotes responsibility and supports order within that system. There are different flavors that we've gone through over time. There was a time when it was very top-down and not team-oriented in medicine, and we've really swung over to a team-oriented care, which I support. I definitely support a team-oriented care. There still has to be some kind of structure, though, and in particular areas, it's still really important to maintain structure. For example, writing of prescriptions. Only certain members of the team are allowed to write prescriptions. Those are the providers, and so it's important that they retain that responsibility. That sort of leads me to the topic of scope of practice. So if you're not in medicine, then you may not realize that every member of the team has a scope of practice, things that they're allowed to do for the patient, for the team, and it really is important and affects how you receive your care. For example, if only one member of the team is allowed to administer a medicine, then when a medicine needs to be administered, then only that person or someone else who has the same scope of practice or has that included in their scope of practice can administer that medicine. And sometimes this leads to disagreements about what people can do within the system, and also it establishes policy among big health organizations as to who does what. And ultimately, in a large organization, those scopes of practice are often decided by the organization based on the laws of your state. But in smaller practices, it's mostly decided by the leaders of the team, which is typically the providers who are running the office. And there's pluses and minuses to both. My current transition is to go from a big health organization to an independent practice, and so it's only natural that those decisions are often made by the doctors who are in that clinic. What am I looking for in terms of responsibility in my practice? Well, I'd love to see a slice of humanity. So there are pressures in medicine to make money, to provide services, whether it's customer service pressures, or whether it's financial pressures, or whether it's time pressures. And sometimes those affect the kinds of patients that can see you in your clinic. One of the things I really loved about being a part of a ministry is that we took care of people from all walks of life. We have doctors and lawyers and politicians and every walk of life that you can think of. And we saw people that were homeless. We saw people with mental health issues. And I really love that. To me, it speaks to some basic truth about the world that we live in, and helps us to understand the world that we live in. So when I'm thinking about my practice, I want to see that. I don't want to just have, only private pay insurance, or I don't want to only have Medicare or Medicaid. I want to have the whole swath of humanity. And when I think about caring for a patient, a person, I think about their entire humanity, their entire person, meaning that, sometimes you're talking to somebody and you want them to, say, exercise. And so you're explaining to them, and you do the initial explanation, but you sense that there's something that seems to be in the way of them getting their exercise. And so then you end up talking about, how many hours they work, or what their sleep habits are like. And it's hard because it takes time to do that. And you have to recognize, that when you've sort of given some recommendation, it just falls flat, that you've got to dig a little deeper and try to figure out what's going on, and offer a perspective that might be helpful. Sometimes I need to know where you're at before I can move in a positive direction. And I mean, these things can weigh on a person's mind for decades until you have a conversation about it, and then they achieve some kind of new perspective, and then are able to do something that's healthy in their life. And I love those situations. I'm always looking for the breakthroughs. I'm really talking about the doctor-patient relationship. I'm talking about that relationship that's set apart from all other situations in life. You might even call it holy. Holy is used in a religious context, but the meaning of the word is that you set something apart for a specific purpose. And I think that there's nothing else like that, where you have that doctor-patient relationship, and it shouldn't be interfered with. It shouldn't be interfered with by commercial forces, whether it's your insurance company or whether it's advertising, and it's out of reverence for that relationship that we try to keep those things out of our practice. We try to keep the interference of those things from intruding in that space. I wish we could be in a situation where money never has anything to do with our medical decisions, but it's just a fact of life, a fact of reality that things cost money, and at least we can be, at least if I'm doing my job correctly, I can at least give you advice about things related to, how much an MRI costs, or whether you need an MRI, or other treatment plans that make sense. What should be also a responsibility of the provider is determining how many patients we're able to take care of. This is a tricky situation, and I would love to take care of as many patients as humanly possible, but I have my limits. When I think about my limitations, I think about what's humanly possible for me to do in terms of the number of patients that I can see and to do it well. And depending on the scenario, I might be able to see more or see less. And that has a lot to do with how the practice is structured. And I would like to structure my practice to see as many people as I can. There's a huge need in this area. I don't know what things are like in the other parts of the country. If you're watching this video and you are in a different state and you want to make a comment about the situation in your area, I think that would be good for me to see. But here, I know that people struggle to find a provider that they can see, not even necessarily a doctor, any provider that they can see. And it can take, when I see people for the first time, they often say, it took me 6 months to get this appointment, or I mean, even as much as a year. And typically, if you have state insurance or if you have Medicare, it's more difficult to obtain care because sometimes practices limit the number of patients that have that type of insurance that they will see. And this kind of goes back to what I was talking about in terms of the slice of humanity. So to me, a nice balance is if, say, 40% of your patient population is Medicare, that'd be what I would shoot for in my own practice, is at least 40% of my practice is, say, Medicare. Ultimately, I do think that it's my responsibility to make the decision about when to close my practice, to a certain insurance, or to open my practice to new patients. And I know that in a lot of situations that people work in, that providers work in, they don't have that prerogative. They don't have that ability to say, you know, I have too many patients, I'm not going to take more patients. Or maybe I could see more patients if, you know, I changed my hours or whatever it is. Who's responsible for innovation? I'm a big believer in the competitive ethic, capitalism, and one of the reasons is innovation. I think it's really conducive to innovation to have people who take responsibility for that process. I do want to innovate myself. I'd like to try things, and I'd like to be in a position where I can do that. Okay, the last thing that I would say about my responsibility is I have a responsibility to the taxpayers of this state and this country to provide the kind of care that they've paid for. So what do I mean by that? I mean that in modern times, medical education, say the University of Washington or other medical schools around the country, they receive tax dollars to provide a need for the community. And that is apart from what I would have paid for my tuition. As I mentioned before, my residency was affiliated with the University of Washington, but not my medical school. And so we all have a vested interest in the process of educating our healthcare professionals, and we've got to ask ourselves, are we getting our money's worth in terms of what we've invested? Now, I'm sure I could talk for a long time about that, but I think I'll just leave it there. So, for example, I would say there are styles of practice where the quality is quite good and people have access to care, meaning if they call up and they want an appointment, that they're able to get that appointment. But sometimes in those scenarios, that means that the provider is only taking care of, say, 300, 400 patients. Whereas in a more common practice, you may have 1,500 patients or even 2,000 patients. So you can see that in the terms of the impact in the community, if you can care for more patients and you have more patient slots available, you know, that people can be seen in, then you're meeting a need in a greater way in the society. Now I want to move on to your responsibility in the healthcare system. If I had to compare my own personal responsibility as a patient versus a provider's responsibility in terms of importance, I would say the most important responsibility belongs to the patient, belongs to us when we think about what can we do to make our health as good as it can possibly be. The everyday, day-to-day activities of life, whether it's exercise or diet or relationships, all those things are really in the prerogative of the patient. There are relationships with the rest of the healthcare system. For example, your insurance company or say the hospital or the lab or the imaging center that really your provider is not responsible for. Those are those relationships that if there's a problem there, you call and talk to them. Now, sometimes they'll say, well, your doctor made a mistake. You know, if they didn't order this right or order that right. And that may be true or it may not be true. And certainly we have an obligation, your providers have an obligation to try to figure out if they've made a mistake. But there's definitely situations where you have that direct relationship with third parties that are not directly coming from your doctor or your doctor's office. I would say that we as patients have a responsibility to be open to the doctor-patient relationship and be open to change and be open to the idea that we might need to change. Okay, let's talk about the societal or system responsibility. Okay, this is a big overview of where responsibility lies in the system. So what I mean by that is I can't go out and just start a hospital. I can't go and just start a nursing home. These are institutions that are present in our society, and they have a lot of moving parts. Government is involved, laws are involved, and it's difficult to have impact on those institutions, and they definitely have responsibility. And I guess I'm only mentioning it because sometimes we in the healthcare field take on responsibilities that really shouldn't be ours to begin with. When I feel terrible that, my patient had to wait in the ER for 8 hours, or they had a bad experience at some institution, or maybe they had a bad experience with my office. Except in a general sense, that isn't something that I need to feel responsible for or that you need to feel responsible for. But you should vote. And we live in a great country that is run by the rule of law, and things can change over long periods of time. And it's our responsibility, I think, to try to work through those big institutions to create change. All right, insurance. Insurance is huge in our country. They determine a lot from their formulary, which is the drugs that you're allowed to take, to the processes of medicine. They decide what kind of procedures or what kind of things I need to say that I need to order an x-ray before I can order an MRI. And some of those kind of things make a lot of sense, but some of them don't. And ultimately, I would like to just have them do what I tell them to do. But anyway, I guess I would say they're necessary. Insurance is necessary. Okay, well that's a good lead into what I'm not responsible for. I'm not responsible for what insurance covers and what they don't cover. There are things that are outside my control in all of life, and that is sort of defines the need for medicine. Disease itself, there are very rare situations where I'm the cause of disease. Mostly disease happens, and we try to prevent it, and then we try to manage it when it happens. There's things that are completely random, and then there are things that we can predict fairly well. We know certain diseases are connected to, say, smoking or obesity or whatever it is. I'm certainly responsible for my interaction with those risk factors, that I tell the truth, and that I be a good advisor to you. I often think of myself as an advisor, a cheerleader, and if I'm doing my job well, then I'm giving you good advice with relation to disease and disease management. But I think sometimes when something bad happens because we feel connected to you, we feel responsible when maybe we shouldn't. So that's a shout out to all you providers out there, and you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's a heavy burden to go through things with people that are hard to deal with. defining what I'm not responsible for has to do with people's expectation. My expectation of myself is to control things that I can't control. I'm going to be disappointed and I'm going to burn out. I'm going to be emotionally not at peace. And the same goes for patients, for everyone who's in the position of a patient. If you are expecting your provider to be responsible for aspects of disease that they have no control over whatsoever, then that leads to unhappiness. The legal definition with regard to responsibility has to do with whether I had a duty, that the medical the medical profession had a duty to do something, had a duty to, order your colonoscopy, or had a duty to, discover that a disease was related to a symptom. And I think rightly so, in order for you to be determined to be legally responsible as a provider, you have to show that you had a duty, and then you also have to show that if something went wrong, it was directly related to your failure to respond to that duty. And I guess I'm just saying that it's really important to know what responsibility belongs where, and it's really important for the operation of a team so that each team member knows what their role is, and it's really nice even when there's overlapping aspects of responsibility so that more than one person can do the same job. But ultimately, I think that healthcare teams should be led by providers who have the largest scope on the healthcare team, usually the doctor or a nurse practitioner or a PA. That's what I'm looking for in my practice, is to have that appropriate division of responsibility. And when you see that, then things work great. It's just like super smooth, and there's good communication, and there's less friction involved at work. So those are the kind of things that I'm looking for. I'm thinking of a story that illuminates the concept of responsibility. And the one that I can come up with that is really important to me is when I had family members who were sick for whatever reason. So I had a family member who needed to be seen at the University of Washington due to a cancer issue, and it was a very rare cancer. And the only way that you can assemble the kind of team that you need to treat something like that is an entire community of responsibility. In the Pacific Northwest here, we think of ourselves as like the rugged individualists. We've come out west, a few hundred years ago, and participated in all of our rugged individualistic activities. And that resonates with me. I like that. But when you have something like that happen in your life, you have to recognize that it's only possible in a community of healthcare professionals, and sometimes multi-generational, and I don't mean, I mean generations of doctors and nurses and people that are passing down knowledge from one person to the next, and writing papers and all those kinds of things, and trying new innovative treatments. And we've got to support that as a nation, as a community. And I'm really thankful that it was available when my family member needed it, and want to see us continue to do those kinds of things as a nation. And I think it is directly related to this idea of responsibility, because if we ask ourselves who takes the responsibility to innovate, then I would say that it's a medical team led by the providers, who are sort of spearheading the direction of that innovation. And that's what I look for in my little clinic, where I'm taking care of people with more mundane kind of things. Actually, we take care of things that are quite rare on occasion. Even my family member has to have a regular PCP. But the point is that not everything can be done as a maverick. You've got to work together with other people, and I'm just thankful that it exists. I wanted to say something else. I wanted to say, if there's anything that you think that I've left out in terms of things that you would be looking for in terms of responsibility, add that to the comments, and I'd be interested to see what you've said. If you're somewhere across the country and you've experienced, or let's just say that you've experienced different places across the country, I'd be interested to know where things are working really good. I'd love to hear that. I'm licensed in Washington State. That's where I've done most of my practice, so I am interested in what's happening in other parts of the country. You know, what are the kinds of things that you think are related to imbalances in responsibility? And put those in the comments. Well, I think that about does it for this video. I know I've got things to do, you've got things to do, so I'm going to let you go, and I'll catch you on the next video.